The knock came at 7:14 on a Thursday evening in late October, and Darius Webb almost didn't answer it. He was in the kitchen, standing over the stove in his socks, trying to salvage what was left of a pot of lentil soup he'd let go too long. The radio was on. CBC, some economist talking about interest rates, and his daughter Zoe was at the kitchen table doing homework, her pencil moving in that slow, reluctant way that meant she was thinking more than writing. The apartment smelled like cumin and old radiator heat, the particular smell of their Thursday nights together. The knock was 3 times, firm. Not aggressive, but not apologetic either. Darius turned the burner down and wiped his hands on a dish towel. He wasn't expecting anyone. The building had a buzzer, and no one had used it. He went to the door and opened it. The woman standing in the hallway was not anyone he recognized. She was perhaps 40, maybe a few years older, dressed in a charcoal coat that looked like it had been made for her specifically, not purchased. Her hair was pulled back. She was holding a manila envelope against her side the way someone holds something they've been carrying for a long time. She looked at him steadily, not nervous, not aggressive, just present, the way people are when they've rehearsed a moment so many times it has stopped feeling like a rehearsal. "Darius Webb," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," he said slowly. "My name is Sylvie Auger. I think you knew my mother." He let her in because Zoe was 12 and watching from the kitchen doorway, and he didn't want his daughter to see him close a door in someone's face. He set a third bowl on the table, even though no one ended up touching the soup. Sylvie Auger sat across from him at the small table by the window. Zoe had been sent to her room and she'd gone, though Darius knew perfectly well she was sitting on the other side of the door with her ear against it. He would have done the same at 12. Sylvie placed the envelope on the table between them. She didn't open it, not yet. "Your mother," Darius said. "Who was your mother?" "Nadine Auger. She was Nadine Beaumont before she married. You would have known her by that name." He went very still. The name landed the way certain names do, not like a word you hear, but like something physical, something that presses against the back of your sternum. Nadine Beaumont. He had not said that name out loud in 11 years. He had thought it in the way you think about things you've agreed to stop thinking about, which is to say often and sideways, in the spaces between other thoughts. "How is she?" he said. Sylvie looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite categorize. Not quite sad, not quite careful, something in the middle. "She passed away," Sylvie said, "in August. Here is what you need to understand about Darius Webb before any of this makes sense." He was 43 years old. He worked as a high school history teacher at a school in Verdun. The kind of school where some kids arrive with enough going against them that teaching history feels like an act of faith. He was good at it. He was the kind of teacher who remembered which students were good at history and which ones were just good at pretending, and he treated both with the same patience. He had a daughter named Zoe who was 12 and preferred math to everything else and had her mother's eyes. Her mother, Zoe's mother, was a woman named Christine who had died of a brain aneurysm when Zoe was 4 years old. It had been fast. That was what the doctors told him, and he had decided to believe it, because some things you decide. He had raised Zoe alone for 8 years. Not entirely alone. His mother lived 20 minutes away in Notre-Dame-de-Grâce, and she came on Tuesdays and some Saturdays. And there were friends, the kind of friends who show up when things are bad and stay when they aren't. But alone in the way that matters, which is the daily kind. Lunches packed, school forms signed, bad dreams attended to at 2 in the morning. He had not been in a relationship since Christine died. Not because he hadn't tried at first, but because trying had required a particular kind of energy that Zoe needed more than he did. And so he had made a quiet, private decision and kept it. Before Christine, before Zoe, before any of it, there had been Nadine Beaumont. They had met in university. He had been 22. She had been 23. He remembered the specific quality of his feelings for her the way you remember a season. Not the individual days, but the light, the temperature of the air, the way time moved differently. They had dated for 2 years. He had believed, with the full certainty of someone who has not yet been taught otherwise, that they would get married. Then her father had intervened, and then she was gone. Sylvie let him sit with it for a moment. He was already beginning to understand, a person who was careful with silence. She knew when to let things land. She was sick for a long time, Sylvie said. She didn't tell many people. She was private about it. "I'm sorry," Darius said. He meant it. He wasn't sure yet what else he was, but he meant that. "She left me something to give to you." Sylvie touched the envelope. "She also left me a lot of things to tell you, which is the harder part. Then start with the easier part." Sylvie almost smiled. It was a quick thing, barely there. "The envelope is letters. She wrote to you after your relationship ended. She sent them. I found them in a box in her apartment, in her closet, organized by date. She paused. There are 43 of them. The radiator ticked. Somewhere in the building, a television was on. 43, Darius said. The last one is dated 6 months before she died. He looked at the envelope. He thought about Zoe in her room on the other side of the wall, her ear against the door, listening to a story she didn't know she was already part of. What's the harder part? He said. Sylvie looked at him steadily. My mother didn't leave willingly. When you were together, your relationship ended because someone told her you'd been unfaithful. More than once, with details, with names. She believed it because the person who told her was someone she trusted completely. Darius said nothing. It wasn't true, Sylvie said. She found out years later that it wasn't true, that the whole thing had been fabricated. By who? Sylvie's expression shifted. Something tightened around the edges. By my father, she said. His name was Henri Auger, and you have seen his type before if you've spent any time at all near the kind of money that doesn't announce itself. He had come from a family that had been wealthy for long enough that the wealth had become invisible to them. The way you stop noticing the smell of your own house. He had married Nadine Beaumont in 1998, 18 months after she ended things with Darius, at a ceremony at a vineyard in the eastern townships that was written up in a magazine Darius had never read. He had been, by all accounts, a decent husband in the technical sense of the word, present, reliable, not unkind. He had also been a man who believed that the right person for his wife was a person like him, and that belief had been so deep and so quiet that he had probably never examined it as a belief at all. He had called it protection, he had called it love even. Sylvie was their only child. She was now 38 years old. She ran a construction firm her father had helped her build, or, as she said it, with a particular dryness. A construction firm he funded so he could remain the architect of all decisions without having to attend any of the meetings. Her father's was still alive. She had spoken to him the day before she came here. That conversation, she said, was why she'd had 2 glasses of wine before getting on the metro. He told you not to come, Darius said. He told me there was no point in opening old wounds. He used that phrase. Old wounds. She looked at the envelope on the table, as though he were the one who had any wounds. This is the thing about grief that no one tells you adequately. It does not arrive in order. Darius had grieved Nadine once, 21 years ago, the specific grief of losing someone you loved to a story you couldn't disprove. He had grieved badly, the way young men often grieve, by refusing to look at it directly, by working hard, by eventually meeting Christine and letting the forward motion of new love cover over the older wound like scar tissue. It had worked the way scar tissue works. It had closed the thing. It had not made him forget it. Now he was sitting at his kitchen table being asked to grieve a second time, and the second grief was stranger than the first because it was the grief of finding out the first grief had been built on a lie. He had not been unfaithful. He had known that. But the knowing had not helped him, because Nadine had believed it, and her believing it had felt, in his worst moments, like a verdict. Like she had looked at him and decided he was the kind of man who would do that. The years had softened that feeling, but they hadn't dissolved it. There is a kind of wound that doesn't hurt anymore, but still changes the way you move. She believed him for how long, Darius said. 7 years, Sylvie said. She found out by accident. They were at dinner with friends, and her father had too much wine, and he said something, a reference to something that didn't make sense if the story he'd told her had been true. She asked him about it later. He didn't deny it. What did she do? Sylvie was quiet for a moment. She left the room. She drove home. She didn't speak to him for a year. She paused, and then she let it go because he was her father, and because she had a child by then, and because life is long and she was tired. But she wrote you the letters. She wrote letters she never sent, Sylvie said, and there was something in the way she said it that was careful and honest and a little painful. She was afraid you'd moved on. She was afraid of what it would mean if you had, and she told you anyway. She was afraid of what it would mean if you hadn't. Sylvie looked at her hands. My mother was a brave person in most ways. About this specific thing, she was afraid. Darius thought of Christine. He thought of Zoe's face when she slept, the way it looked so much like Christine's that sometimes he had to leave the room. He thought about the specific texture of choices made in grief, how they compact over time into something that feels like identity, like character, like who you simply are rather than who you became because of what happened to you. She had a good life? He asked. It was a strange question, maybe. But Sylvie seemed to understand it. She loved her work, Sylvie said. She was a landscape architect. She designed a park in Laval. I don't know if you know it, the one near the river with the meadow section, where they let the wildflowers go. That was her project. She was proud of it. She looked at him. She talked about you, when she was sick and the conversation turned serious. She talked about what you were like when you were young. She said you were the kind of person who made other people feel like what they were saying was important. She said she had never quite found that again. The radiator ticked. From Zoe's room there was the careful, deliberate sound of absolute silence, which is the sound of a child not breathing so they can hear better. They talked for 2 more hours. Darius made tea because the soup was beyond saving, and his hands needed something to do. Sylvie was, he found, easy to talk to in the way that certain people are. Not because they work to seem accessible, but because they have been through enough that they have stopped performing. She ran her company firmly and without apology. She had been married once, briefly. She had a son named Mark, who was 9, and lived primarily with his father but spent summers with her. She had, she said, a complicated relationship with her father that she was still in the process of figuring out. He's not a bad man, she said twice. Both times, it sounded like something she was trying to make true through repetition. No, Darius said, probably not. He thought about this. People who do damaging things on purpose and without guilt are actually pretty rare. Most people hurt each other through a failure of imagination. They just can't picture what someone else's life looks like from the inside. Sylvie looked at him across the table. My mother was right, she said. About that thing she said, the way you listen. He didn't know what to do with that. He let it sit. Around 9 o'clock, Zoe appeared in the kitchen doorway in her pajamas with the unconvincing expression of someone who has just woken up, despite the fact that no 12-year-old falls asleep by 9 on a school night when there are strangers in the kitchen. I'm thirsty, she announced, addressing the refrigerator. Zoe, Darius said, this is Sylvie. She's a friend of mine, sort of, from a long time ago. Zoe looked at Sylvie with the frank, clinical appraisal of a child who has not yet learned to disguise her curiosity. Sylvie looked back at her with something that might have been recognition. Hi, Zoe said. Hi, Sylvie said. Your dad says you're good at math. Zoe cut her eyes at Darius with an expression that said she was not entirely pleased to have been discussed, but was also not displeased. I like it, she said with studied casualness. It has rules. History has rules too, Darius said. History has interpretations, Zoe corrected. That's different. She got her glass of water and retreated, and there was a quality in the way she walked, careful, measured, that told Darius she was thinking about everything she'd heard, filing it away in whatever private organizational system 12-year-olds use for information they don't know what to do with yet. Sylvie watched her go. Her expression was difficult to read. She's wonderful, she said. She's going to be terrifying, Darius said, in the best possible way. After Sylvie left, Darius sat at the kitchen table alone with the envelope. He sat with it for a long time before he opened it, 43 letters. The first one was dated April of 2003. He would have been 24. He remembered that spring with a clarity that surprised him even now, the particular quality of his anger, the way he'd thrown himself into finishing his degree with a furious, blunt energy, how he'd told himself the story of the breakup as owed him being discarded, about not being enough, and had believed it so completely, and for so long that it had become a kind of bedrock truth. He unfolded the first letter. Darius, I don't know if I will ever send this. I'm sitting in my apartment in Outremont and it's raining, which feels like a cliché but also like the world is just being honest for once. I keep going over the things my father said about you and trying to make them fit with who you were when I knew you, and they don't fit. They don't fit, and that's the thing I can't stop turning over. But he had proof, he said, and he showed me things, and I am afraid of what it means that I believed him, even with all the evidence of you that I had from 2 years of actually knowing you. I am afraid of what I chose. I am afraid of who I was in that choosing. He stopped. He folded the letter carefully and placed it on the table. He would read them all, he thought. But not tonight. Tonight he needed to sit with this for a while in the quiet, with the sound of Zosie's breathing through the wall, with the small domestic weight of his actual life around him. Outside, the October rain had started again. He could hear it against the window. He thought about Nadine designing a park, standing in a meadow of wildflowers she had chosen, standing in something she had built with her own particular knowledge of what things need to grow. He thought about the ways we carry grief, not always out in the open, but worked into the architecture of how we live. The routes we don't take, the doors we leave shut. He had left certain doors shut for 21 years and called it practicality, called it moving forward, and it had been those things. It had been necessary and real. But it had also been a long time to carry a verdict you didn't deserve. He thought about the question he'd asked Sylvie. She had a good life and how she'd answered it. Not with the easy reassurance he might have expected, but with the landscape architect's park in Laval, the meadow section where they let the wildflowers go. It was not nothing, he thought. It was, in fact, quite a lot. He called Sylvie 2 weeks later. He had read all 43 letters by then. He had read them slowly over 11 nights, 1 or 2 at a time, the way you read things that require you to be a particular version of yourself. The version that can receive certain truths without building walls around them. The letters were not what he expected. He had expected grief, or apology, or the kind of detailed self-justification that people write when they feel guilty and need an audience for their guilt. There was some of that, but mostly they were just correspondence. Things Nadine had wanted to tell him, a book she'd read that she thought he would argue with, a funny thing that had happened at work, the small, layered accumulation of a life being lived addressed to someone she had lost but hadn't stopped talking to. In the letter from 2011, she wrote about watching her daughter sleep and thinking about the specific arithmetic of love, how you could give your whole heart to a child and still have a separate pocket of it that belonged to an earlier version of yourself, to the person you were before you understood how quickly a life could change direction. He called her on a Sunday afternoon while Zoe was at his mother's. "I read them," he said. "All of them," Sylvie said. "All of them." He stood at the window in the kitchen, looking out at the street. The trees had lost most of their leaves. The sky was the particular gray of a Montreal November, the color of a city bracing itself. "I want to ask you something that you don't have to answer." "Okay." "The park in Laval, the one with the wildflowers." "Yes. Is it open to the public?" There was a pause. Something shifted in the pause, some small adjusting thing. "Yes," Sylvie said. "I'd like to see it," Darius said. "I'd like to take Zoe. I thought if you wanted, you and Mark could come, if you're not busy." He paused. "You can say no. I don't have an agenda. I just think Zoe would like the meadow, and I think she should know about Nadine. Not everything, but something. The important parts." Another pause. "Longer this time. She talked about you," Sylvie said. "She said if she could change one thing, she would have sent one of the letters. Just one. She said she would have wanted to know that you were all right." "I'm all right," Darius said. "I know," Sylvie said. "I could tell when I met you. I came here expecting, I don't know what I expected. Someone broken, someone bitter. Someone I'd need to apologize to on behalf of my family." She paused. "You made me tea and let me talk for 2 hours and asked me if she'd had a good life. That's not someone who's been destroyed by it." "I had Zoe," he said simply. "You get practical when you have someone depending on you. There isn't a lot of time to be destroyed. My mother would have liked her," Sylvie said. "I think so too," he said. They went to the park on a Saturday in early December, when the first snow was down but not yet the heavy kind. Just a thin, serious layer of white over everything, the city under its first restraint of the season. The meadow in winter was not the meadow Nadine had probably imagined when she designed it. The wildflowers were gone, only the dried stalks standing above the snow, the seed heads that the birds had not yet found. The path curved through it in a wide arc, unhurried, and there were benches at intervals, and at the far end a low stone wall overlooking the river, which was gray and moving and indifferent to all of them in the particular way rivers are. Mark was 9, and had been told nothing specific except that they were visiting a park designed by someone important. He ran ahead of everyone and threw himself into a pile of snow with the pure physical abandon of a child who has not yet learned to be self-conscious. Zoe watched him with the calculated appreciation of a 12-year-old who considers herself too old for snow piles and is only barely managing not to join him. Sylvie stood beside Darius at the stone wall. "She stood here," Sylvie said. "When they finished the project, she sent me a photo. She's standing right here, looking at the river, and she's not smiling for the camera. She's just present, just looking at it." Darius looked at the river. He thought about a woman standing here, and about all the time between them, and about the 43 letters in a box, and about how a life was made up of all the things that happened and also all the things that didn't, both present at once, the actual and the possible running parallel to each other all the way to the end. "I forgive him," Darius said, and he surprised himself slightly because he hadn't known he was going to say it until he did, but it was true. "Your father, I don't need to tell him. I'm not saying it for him, but I want to say it out loud." Sylvie was quiet for a moment. "I'm working on it," she said. "I'll get there. You don't have to rush." "No," she said. "I know." Behind them, Mark had convinced Zoe into the snow, or Zoe had convinced herself and was using Mark as cover. She was helping him build something with her habitual precision, the same way she did everything. Measurements assessed, structural issues anticipated, the project taken seriously. Mark was making suggestions. Zoe was evaluating them without cruelty. "She's going to be an architect," Sylvie said. "She says engineer," Darius said. "But I think you might be right." Sylvie smiled. A full one this time, not the careful small one from the kitchen table. "She'd be good at either. She'd be good at most things," Darius said. "She gets that from her mother." He hadn't said that to many people. It came out simply, without the weight it sometimes carried, and he noticed that. He noticed that this was a place, this moment, this specific December afternoon on a riverbank with the snow and the dried wildflower stalks, and someone who knew something of what he carried. He noticed that in this place the thing could be said plainly. There was a particular grief and a particular gratitude standing here, and he was old enough now to hold both at once without needing to sort them out, without needing one to defeat the other. Nadine had built this park. It was real, and it was good, and it was still standing. And 30 meters away, his daughter was explaining structural load to a 9-year-old in the snow. That, he thought, was enough. That was in fact everything.